Solomon's temple took 7 years to build, deployed a workforce of 180,000 people, and was described in the Bible with extraordinary precision, right down to the cubit. Yet not one confirmed stone of it has ever been excavated from beneath the Temple Mount. The most sacred structure in Israelite history has nearly vanished from the archaeological record. So how did a kingdom barely 2 generations old, with no tradition of monumental construction, produce what ancient texts called the most sacred place in Israel? And what exactly did Solomon build? To understand what was erected on the limestone ridge of Mount Moriah sometime in the 10th century BCE, you have to understand the world Solomon stepped into. This was not a story that began with blueprints and delivery schedules. When it began with a kingdom that had only recently stopped moving. The Israelite monarchy was barely 1 generation old when Solomon came to power around 970 BCE. His father David had unified the disparate tribal territories of Israel and Judah under a single crown, captured the Jebusite hilltop city of Jerusalem, and established it as his capital, a strategically neutral location that belonged to no single tribe and therefore offended none. But David's reign, for all its military success, had been turbulent. Internal revolts, the catastrophic affair with Bathsheba, the rebellion of his son Absalom, and a theological prohibition on his own building ambitions had left the architectural dream unrealized. The Ark of the Covenant, Israel's most sacred object, the golden chest believed to contain the stone tablets of the Sinai covenant, was housed in a tent. Solomon inherited this situation at roughly 20 years of age. He also inherited extraordinary political advantages. The ancient Near East in the early 10th century BCE was, by the standards of the region, unusually open. Egypt's new kingdom had collapsed. The great Hittite empire was gone. Assyria was in a period of relative contraction. The Aramean city-states of Syria were prosperous but not expansionist. For a brief historical window, a well-organized kingdom controlling the overland trade corridors between Arabia, Egypt, and the northern Levant could generate enormous wealth from trade and transit fees alone. Solomon exploited this window with systematic efficiency. He reorganized Israel's territory into 12 administrative districts, each responsible for provisioning the royal court for 1 month of the year. He entered into marriage alliances with neighboring rulers, including the king of Egypt, an extraordinary diplomatic achievement, since Egyptian pharaohs rarely gave their daughters to foreign kings. He developed copper-smelting operations in the Arabah, the southern desert valley, and conducted maritime trade through the Red Sea port of Etzion-Geber. The biblical text records annual gold revenues of 666 talents, approximately 25 tons of refined gold arriving in Jerusalem every year. Whether that precise figure is literal or represents a rounded symbolic number, it points to a kingdom generating wealth at a scale that few of its neighbors could match. This wealth made the temple possible. But economics alone doesn't explain the ambition. For that, you have to understand the problem Solomon inherited at the center of Israelite religious life. For roughly 4 centuries, from the Sinai wilderness period through the conquest, the settlement, and the tumultuous years of the judges, Israel had worshipped through the tabernacle. This was not a crude structure. The tabernacle, as described in Exodus, was an engineering achievement in portable form. Acacia wood frames overlaid with gold, fabric coverings of linen and goat hair and ram's skins, a courtyard of linen curtains, bronze sockets for the posts, silver hooks and bands, precisely specified dimensions for every component. It was, in the language of the ancient world, a dwelling for the divine, designed to be assembled, disassembled, and carried forward through the wilderness. But Israel was no longer in the wilderness. Under David, the people had a capital city. Under Solomon, that city was rapidly becoming a regional power center. The theological situation was increasingly incongruous. A settled, prosperous, monumentally ambitious kingdom whose gods still technically lived in a tent. Solomon's decision to build a permanent temple was therefore not simply a royal prestige project, though it was certainly that as well. It was a solution to a theological problem that had been building for generations, and yet the transition was not theologically uncomplicated. Solomon's prayer at the temple's dedication, recorded in 1 Kings 8, acknowledges the paradox with striking directness. But will God indeed dwell on earth? He asks. Behold, in heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you. How much less this temple which I have built? The building was not where God was kept, it was where God could be met. With the theological framework established, the practical challenge was immense. Solomon's first move was to reach north, to the Phoenician coast. Hiram, king of Tyre, was the ruler of the most commercially sophisticated city-state in the ancient Near East. Tyre controlled the cedar forests of Lebanon, and cedar was not simply a preferred building material. In the ancient world, Lebanon cedar was the structural equivalent of titanium. Egyptian pharaohs had imported it for their most ambitious temple projects for 3,000 years. Cedar resisted rot. It repelled insects. It could be worked into lengths unavailable in any other regional timber. And its natural aromatic oils never fully dissipated. Ancient cedar fragments retain their scent for millennia. The agreement Solomon struck with Hiram was a detailed commercial treaty. 20,000 kor of wheat and 20 kor of refined oil delivered to Phoenicia each year in exchange for cedar and cypress timber. The logs would be floated south along the Mediterranean coast to Joppa, modern Tel Aviv Jaffa, approximately 35 miles from Jerusalem, with 2,500 feet of elevation gain to the Judean plateau. Moving heavy cedar logs through that terrain required organized relay systems of pack animals, designated rest stations, and maintained roads. The logistics were comparable in complexity to the timber supply networks that sustained the great building programs of Egypt and Mesopotamia, though those programs had navigable rivers. Solomon's construction project did not. Beyond the timber, Hiram contributed something even more valuable: skilled labor. The master craftsman Hiram of Tyre, son of a Tyrian father and an Israelite mother, would oversee the bronze program of the temple. The Phoenicians were master builders. Their techniques, ashlar masonry using stones cut in alternating header and stretcher courses, appear at confirmed Iron Age Israelite sites at Megiddo, Hazor, and Giza, 3 cities that 1 Kings 9 specifically identifies as rebuilt by Solomon. Solomon wasn't merely purchasing materials. He was importing an entire construction tradition that Israel did not yet possess. Now we turn to the part of the temple's construction story that consistently strains credibility, and yet, when examined carefully, reveals an organizational logic that is genuinely impressive. The workforce numbers in 1 Kings 5 are large enough to feel mythological on first reading, but the text provides structural detail that makes the logistics coherent. The Lebanon contingent, 30,000 Israelite men organized in rotating monthly shifts, 10,000 at a time, 1 month on and 2 months off. This rotation was deliberate. Keeping 30,000 men permanently in Lebanon would have stripped the agricultural workforce. 10,000 cycling in and out was economically sustainable. The local workforce, 70,000 burden bearers to move materials, 80,000 stonecutters working in the Judean hills. Total, 180,000 workers overseen by 3,300 foremen. Against the estimated Israelite population of 500,000 to 1 million people, 180,000 workers represents somewhere between 18 and 36% of the entire population. For comparison, the United States military at its World War II peak mobilized roughly 12% of the American population. Solomon's construction project, proportionally, was mobilizing twice that fraction. And then there is the detail that changes how you understand the whole project. No sound of hammer or chisel or iron tool was heard at the building site while it was being built. The stones arrived at the Temple Mount already shaped. Every block was cut to its final specifications at the quarry, dressed and finished before transport, so that when it reached its designated position in the wall, it simply had to be placed. What this tells us is that 80,000 quarry workers were operating a distributed prefabrication system. Precise specifications had to be communicated across dozens of quarrying sites in the Judean hills. Dimensional consistency had to be maintained across all of them. Delivery had to be timed so that the right shapes arrived when needed. This is sophisticated project management, accomplished without modern measuring tools beyond the cubit rod and without electronic communication. Beneath modern Jerusalem, physical evidence of this quarrying infrastructure survives. Zedekiah's Cave, also known as Solomon's Quarries, extends approximately 750 feet under the Old City, carved into the limestone bedrock north of the Temple Mount. The cave shows clear evidence of ancient stone extraction, with the distinctive marks of wedge-splitting ancient quarry workers used to separate blocks from the bedrock face. The limestone matches the type used in major ancient Jerusalem construction. Now turn from the workforce to the building itself. The temple was tripartite, 3 connected spaces moving from east to west. The Ulam, the vestibule, measured 10 cubits deep and 20 cubits wide. The Haikal, the main hall, measured 40 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The Devir, the Holy of Holies, measured 20 cubits in every direction, a perfect cube. Converting, the main hall was approximately 58 feet long, 29 feet wide, and 43 feet tall, taller than a modern 4-story building's interior height, with a floor area roughly equivalent to a substantial church nave. This room belonged to the priests. Ordinary Israelites never entered it. Surrounding the main structure on 3 sides ran side chambers in 3 stories, each wider than the one below, 5 cubits, 6 cubits, 7 cubits. This stepped expansion was achieved by building the outer wall with ledges at each story level, so each floor rested on the ledge without beams inserted into the wall. The text is explicit. No beam was mortised into the wall of the house. This is structurally sophisticated by any ancient standard. Here is where the investigation reaches one of its most unexpected discoveries. This floor plan was not unique to Jerusalem. Archaeologists excavating in Syria and Turkey uncovered temples from the same period with the same layout. The Ayin Dara temple in northern Syria, dated to approximately 1300 to 1000 BCE, shares the same tripartite plan: vestibule, main hall, inner sanctuary, with side chambers along the exterior. Its proportional relationships are strikingly similar to the biblical description. Enormous carved lion and sphinx figures flank its entrance in positions paralleling Solomon's bronze pillars. Carved into the threshold are 2 giant footprints, as if a divine figure of colossal size had stepped into the sanctuary. The Tel Tayanat temple in southern Turkey is so close to the biblical floor plan that it has become the primary architectural parallel used in scholarly reconstructions of Solomon's temple. Same 3-chamber arrangement, similar proportions, associated with a royal palace complex. Exactly the relationship the text describes between Solomon's temple and his adjacent palace. Solomon was not inventing a new architectural form. He was building within a recognized regional temple tradition. The form was borrowed. What went inside and over every surface was not. Step inside the finished temple, and your first impression is not of scale, it is of surface. Every interior surface was covered. The floors were cypress planking, smooth, aromatic. The walls were cedar panelling, carved with gourds and open flowers and cherubim. And over all of this the text says, Zahav. Refined gold, overlaid across every carved cedar surface, the floors, the ceiling, the doors and their frames and hinges. 2 Chronicles 3 specifies 600 talents of gold for the ceiling alone, approximately £45,000. Whether that figure is literal or representational, it points to a commitment of resources that only a kingdom at the peak of its tributary wealth could sustain. But the gold was not the only sensory element, for cedar's natural aromatic oils don't dissipate quickly. Ancient cedar fragments retain their fragrance for thousands of years. The interior of Solomon's temple would have had a persistent, distinctive scent, unlike the stone and plaster smell of ordinary buildings. In a culture where specific fragrances were theologically associated with divine presence, the cedar walls would have been understood as architecturally appropriate. And then there was the light, or rather, its carefully controlled absence. The temple had narrow upper windows admitting minimal light. The main hall was lit by 10 golden menorahs. As you moved deeper into the building, light decreased. By the time you reached the threshold of the Holy of Holies, lamplight barely reached the doorway. And beyond that doorway, complete darkness. No lamp burned in the Holy of Holies. And the darkness was not a deficiency, it was a design feature. In Hebrew theology, the divine presence, the kavod, was associated with cloud, smoke, and thick darkness. God appeared at Sinai in dense cloud. The temple's darkened inner sanctuary was an architectural representation of that theology, real presence shrouded. In the Holy of Holies stood 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits tall, approximately 15 feet. Each had a wingspan of 10 cubits. Standing side by side, their inner wings touched at the center of the room, and their outer wings touched the north and south walls. Their combined wingspan filled the full 20-cubit width of the chamber. Between them, in complete darkness, on the gold-covered cedar floor, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark had travelled from Sinai through the wilderness, through the conquest, either through the Philistine captivity and return, through David's tent in Jerusalem. Now it came to rest in the perfect cube of the Holy of Holies, under the outstretched wings of 15-foot cherubim, in silence and darkness. And then the doors closed. Only the high priest would enter this room once a year, on Yom Kippur, alone, with a censer of burning incense held before him, so that a cloud of smoke filled the room, veiling the divine presence above the mercy seat. He performed the required ritual, said the required prayers, and withdrew. The entire sequence, from open courtyard to vestibule, to main hall, to threshold of the inner sanctuary, was a continuous journey of increasing restriction, increasing sensory intensity, increasing theological gravity. Every architectural decision was a physical embodiment of the theology of divine transcendence. The holy was real. The holy was not absent, but the holy was not casually available. Now step back from the interior and look at the exterior. Flanking the temple entrance stood the 2 bronze pillars, Jachin and Boaz. Each 18 cubits tall, 27 feet, with capitals adding another 5 cubits. Total height, approximately 34 feet, roughly the height of a modern 3-story building. Each pillar was hollow, with walls 4 fingers thick, decorated with networks of chains, rows of pomegranates in 2 registers, and crowning lily work. Their casting was one of the most significant metallurgical undertakings in the ancient Levant. Large-scale bronze casting required substantial furnace capacity, precise timing of the pour, and specific clay for the moulds. The text places the casting in the clay grounds of the Jordan Valley, between Sukkoth and Zarethan, specific geographical information reflecting genuine technical knowledge. The Jordan Valley's alluvial clay was fine-grained, thermally stable, and ideal for investment casting molds. But the centerpiece of the bronze program was the sea. The Bronze Sea, a massive hemispherical basin, 10 cubits across and 5 cubits deep, resting on the backs of 12 cast bronze oxen, 4 groups of 3 facing the 4 cardinal directions. Capacity: 2,000 baths, approximately 12,000 to 13,000 gallons. Weight of the water alone: over 100,000 pounds. The 12 oxen were structural, not decorative. They had to bear well over 60 tons. 12 oxen facing the 4 directions of the compass, supporting a basin of water echoing the primordial waters of Genesis. The Bronze Sea was simultaneously functional. Priests used it for purification and cosmological. A model of the created order placed in the courtyard of the building where the Creator was met. The sea stood for 373 years. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian forces of Nebuchadnezzar II arrived. The Bronze Sea was smashed and carried away. The gold overlay was stripped. The cedar panelling burned. The building that had organized Israelite religious life for nearly 4 centuries was gone, and not one confirmed stone of it has been identified since. The Temple Mount has been continuously occupied and rebuilt for 3,000 years. Herod's massive expansion in the 1st century BCE built directly over the earlier structures. Neither the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque stand on the platform today. No systematic archaeological excavation beneath the Temple Mount surface is currently possible. What archaeologists have done is build a case from parallel evidence. The Ain Dara and Tel Tainat floor plans confirm the historical plausibility of the temple's layout. The Megiddo ivories depict cherubim matching the temple's iconography. Phoenician construction techniques appear at Iron Age Israelite sites independently associated with Solomon's reign. Eilat Mazar's 2010 excavations in the Ophel area confirmed that major 10th century BCE construction was occurring in Jerusalem during precisely the period when the temple was built. The absence of direct physical evidence reflects the inaccessibility of the site and the thoroughness of ancient destruction, not the absence of a historical building. And then there is the category of evidence that no excavation can provide. The temple shaped everything that came after it. The Psalms are full of the temple's specific experience: the courts, the ascent, the sound of worship growing louder as Jerusalem came into view. Lamentations reads like grief for a specific building in a specific place. Ezekiel's vision of the ideal future temple, recorded in chapters 40 to 48, reads like architectural plans because it was modelled on a building Ezekiel had known before his exile. When the exiles returned under the edict of Cyrus and built the second temple, the elderly men who had seen Solomon's building wept when they saw the foundations of the new one, not from joy but from contrast. Yet even the diminished Second Temple became the center of Jewish religious life for 5.5 centuries, until Herod transformed it into one of the architectural wonders of the Roman world. And the Western Wall, the massive Herodian retaining wall, remains the holiest physically accessible site in Judaism today. People press their hands against it, insert prayers into the stone gaps, and direct toward it a religious attention that has persisted for 2,000 years. The wall is Herodian, but the sacred geography it marks, the idea that this specific ridge in this specific city is where the divine and human most nearly meet, has been continuous from the moment Solomon began quarrying stone on Mount Moriah. He built a building in cedar and gold and bronze and dressed limestone. It took 7 years. It required 180,000 workers and imported timber from a foreign king and enough gold to cover every interior surface of an 87-foot hall. It housed a room of perfect darkness, a box of acacia wood and gold, and the concept of divine presence approached through restriction rather than access. That building is gone. The idea it embodied is not. What do you think it would have felt like to stand in the courts of Solomon's temple for the first time? To look up at those 34-foot bronze pillars, smell the cedar and the altar smoke, and know that somewhere in the darkness beyond the olive wood doors, in a perfect cube of golden cedar, the ark rested between the wings of 15-foot cherubim in complete silence. Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe to keep investigating, and come back because the biblical world has not finished revealing what it contains.